on the road to 10 million streams on Spotify, and I just want to address something that's been on my mind. It's been about indie artists and labels. I actually recently saw a video, and it was an artist that people think is pretty big. I mean, played with a lot of different people. It's actually Rico Nasty, and there are many other artists who go through the same thing, but she was saying basically that she doesn't make as much money as people think that she does. And the thing is, there's a reason why, and I'm gonna give a little background, but this is a little bit about why I'll never join a music label. See, my granddad was a pretty big name in the music industry before he passed. He worked with labels, he had a label, he promoted artists on labels, and when I told him that I wanted to get into music, he advised me against doing a label, especially at first. And I wondered why, because he worked in it his whole life. He's literally been a music producer, won a Grammy, music marketer, met all these cool people, and he was saying all these things, and I tuned up, I locked in, and I listened. And so I think I'll never be a part of a label because of these reasons. Number one, autonomy, the biggest one for me. A lot of labels dictate when you can release, what you release, when you release it, how your sound sounds, how your look is, how you are. And a lot of labels say that they don't do that, especially independent labels, and there might be some independent labels who, acknowledge what your style was like. But it's just interesting to me because a lot of labels bring you on because of your style, like the way that you are, the fan base that you accrued, and the vibe that you have, right? But it's mainly to get someone malleable that they could put towards their goals and ideals. So if you're a very eccentric rapper, they might have you come out with something different. It might be different in that way. And my grandpa experienced a bunch of stuff like that too, where he had an artist and they would complain because their sound started out one way, but the label wanted it a different way. And so they don't really have much autonomy on their sound and their style unless they're a very big name or exceptions, right? But mainly, a lot of artists don't get to pick what their style and sound is like. And that would be tough for me because my sound is a combination of beach music, elevator music, and video game music, and electronic music, all wrapped into one little bow. And so it might even be hard for me to get on a label to begin with. I don't really have the palette for it, even in my pop music, to get on a label that would keep that sound, right? They'd like little twinges of it here and there, but they might change it. So that's number one. Also, you don't really get to dictate when things come out. A lot of artists, you'll hear they come out with some pretty good songs, people like them, but if it doesn't have the reception that the label wanted, or there's some other project that they're working on or whatever, you can get put on the back burner and have a bank of songs and never be able to release them. Plus, as you've seen with like the TikTok ban and everything else, TikTok versus UMG, TikTok ban aside, TikTok versus UMG, like anyone who was a part of Universal Music Group, their music got pulled from TikTok, and that was something they couldn't even control. So there's some things that you lose that autonomy and freedom with the label. Another thing is money. They take a lot of money from you between the managers, the tours, the merch, everything else. These contracts are not built for the artists to thrive. Even artists that we find very successful, like One Direction or anything like that, made very little money compared to what you would think they would make. And I'm not saying like $10 million is a little bit of money, right? But if they made $1 billion, it's like them getting a small chunk of change on the money that they made with their work, their practice, their time, their efforts. And these labels say that they make these artists, but they find these artists and they'll mold them into something where they can sell. But a lot of times they already had a fan base, right? So One Direction aside, because they're a little interesting, but many artists had a fan base, grew it themselves, and found a label, and then the label takes a lot of money from them. So they don't actually end up with as much money as they think, especially when they like front money. There's a lot of labels will like front money to the artists. Like they'll be like, hey, based upon your numbers and everything else, we'll give you $1 million. And then if it doesn't sell as well or something happens or whatever, then you owe, which my granddad has told me about as well. So you think you got $1 million because they gave you $1 million, but in reality, you only sold $500,000. So where's that $500,000? And a lot of times, oh, my pup is shaking. a lot of times these artists spend that million because they never seen that kind of money before, and then they're like, okay, now you owe us and you won't see anything for a while, or you have to pay up or whatever. And so that's another part, the money, especially for your hard work and your resources, your talent and your efforts, just for you to end up owing them sometimes, or them taking a lot of money out of your pocket. And another thing is just, I like having control, and that may be a problem, but I like being indie because I have control over my releases. And also, I am not the best at releasing a lot of music all the time, or like in a set fixed amount. Like, a lot of labels expect you to release a song or expect you to come out with a song at a certain time, or to work with people or get something done and write. And a lot of times that's where these pop artists get a lot of writers, because sometimes it's hard to come up with that many songs all the time. And the label uses like, writers, instrumentalists, all that stuff to be able to kind of give you a basis, a background. And sometimes they even buy songs and the person just sings over them. A lot of inner workings of that is that sometimes producers will make a song and then they'll sell the song, and the songwriter sells the song, and songwriters don't get a lot of money. That's a whole nother story I could talk about, but that's one thing that can happen. And so these people who are writing these popular songs, they just sell them to someone and they sing it and it just moves on. And so I like to be able to control my releases. I like to be able to control my sound. I like to be able to have a hold of my own money. And at the end of the day, when you work with a label, you have to hit 5, 6, 7, 8 times up on your streams, on your records, on your fan base, to be able to make the same amount that some of these indie artists who may have like half of the fan base make, because it's going straight to them. They might have a little manager or a small crew, but it's their money and they get to pay and outsource effectively, like a YouTube or anyone else who is not a part of a label, but they run their channel, they run their page, or an artist who makes all their art and sells it through shops and does all of that on their own. So it can be hard, and I think there are some pros, like a lot of the work, the administrative work is taken off of you if you're in a label. Also, the resources for them to market and advertise for you is also there, but that's also where they can get you, because if they advertise for you and market for you and your stuff is a flop, that's where paying for that money comes in. And so this has some pros, it has some cons, but that's just a little bit of the reason why I won't join a label. And I'm sure that many others might be like, oh, well, if you got a deal, then you would probably join. No, I'm okay. I like to be able to do what I want to do, and a lot of times that just was very restrictive as an independent person, but to each their own. It's something that is not talked about enough, though, especially in the music industry. And I'm glad that people now, like with the TikTok, like TikTok and social media, are talking about their stories, because now people can realize that a lot of people have been kind of taken advantage of and screwed over basically by those deals and those contracts, as we've seen famously with like the Megan Thee Stallion contract, 360 deals, all that stuff. And so, yeah, just something to think about. And on the road to 10 million streams, I'd be happy, because every single cent of that would go to my pocket, which I would appreciate. I mean, besides the fees and all that stuff, which I've talked about before on this channel, but it's something that I find interesting and I look a lot into, especially being someone who grew up in that environment, like with my granddad. But yeah, just a little bit about why I wouldn't personally join a label, and something to consider if you're an artist and you weigh that decision. There's some indie labels that are great and treat their artists well and fairly, because they hear about how these musicians are treated, and a lot of them may be former musicians and they figure it out for you, but it's a lot of due diligence and it's just something that you got to do. But until then, I'll see you tomorrow.